Okay, I think 5 minutes past, we'll probably get things going. Welcome everybody. I'm Alex. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of the Data City, who organised today's webinar. So I'd like to thank Andy for all his efforts in that regard. We've got a great panel of people today that have been involved in various clusters projects with us. So I'm very pleased to introduce John Cooper from DCIT, Adam Brown from Cambridge Econometrics, Josh Hawkins from the Midlands Engine, and Fatima, who's from the Data City and actually has done a lot of the work across all of these projects. We're going to start by just a little bit of scene setting. Having worked on these projects, the first thing we tend to hit is this question about what even is a cluster. So at the very sort of top level, I think it's relatively easy to get your head around. But when you get into the detail of trying to find data that matches or neatly describes that, it gets a bit more nuanced and tricky. And if anyone on this course worked with clusters, I think I'm sure you're familiar with the challenges. I thought this was quite a nice description of the sort of concept, the overarching spirit of a cluster. They're local concentrations of similar or complementary industries, and they're aggregating production, exchange of goods, services, talent, tech, and also, we very much hope that they act as beacons for attracting further inbound investment, industry, innovation, and people. And then it's, I think, in our world, always quite easy to get obsessed with clusters in the context of tech and science, life sciences, etc. But equally, Hollywood is just as justifiably described as a cluster as any engineering, biology sector or artificial intelligence. And then two of the most famous there I've put on the screen. So what we're going to do is start by walking through a number of the projects. So if we move to the next slide. Andy, so we're going to start with Josh and the Midlands engine work. So Josh and Fatima will go into a bit of a deep dive on that. We're then going to hand over to John, who's going to talk through the innovation clusters project that we did with DCIT, and also we're going to just talk through the tool. So Fatima will, most of you may have seen it, but equally some of you may not, so we'll talk you through that. Adam's going to talk through some work we've done with West Yorkshire Combined Authority, and then I'm very excited to show you our latest innovation, which is that we are deploying a clusters tool. I'll keep my powder a little bit dry on that, but it's taking all the learnings from the work we've done on these projects and turning it into part of our product. And I'm going to show you the prototype of that before we head into a panel discussion. There's already a question about how important are clusters. We'll come to that through this. So we've got a set of questions that I've set out, but equally we do invite questions from attendees. So as we go, if you'd like to start putting those into the Q&A feature in Zoom, I've got that open on another screen just to my left. So if you see me looking this way, it's because I'm trying to keep an eye on your inputs, and we'll try and get through as many of those as possible in the time that we have in the Q&A at the end. Okie dokie, over to Josh.
Thank you. And next slide. Hi, everyone. So yeah, my name is Josh Hawkins. I head up the international investment work we do in the Midlands Engine. So if you've not heard of the Midlands Engine, it's the pan-regional partnership for the Midlands. Not the entirety of the Midlands, as you might understand it, but as you can see on the map there, that's our space. So we're partly funded by government, partly funded by local government. The whole idea is we're a platform through which businesses, universities, government, local and national come together around common issues in order to drive growth. So collective action, basically. We're kind of an apolitical entity through which that can happen, and I'm part of the secretariat. We also have what we call the Midlands Engine Observatory, which is kind of an economic intelligence unit. Well, that's the name of the part we commission it from, to do a lot of analysis and kind of economic data as well. In the investment space, one of the kind of our main outputs initially a few years ago was compiling the Midlands investment portfolio. So this is a compilation, effectively, a directory of the most significant investment opportunities, primarily capital propositions from local authorities across the region. And when we did that, we thought, great, so here's the space where a company can come and set up. But why would a company come here? So got really interested in, okay, what's the investment potential of our region and how can we articulate that? And of course, clusters at the time, and now perhaps even more so, were a kind of unit of understanding or idea of business opportunity and kind of spatial arrangements. So we kind of took the dive into clusters. And on the next slide, I'll introduce what I mean by that. So although a core part of the work we did was the mapping of the clusters, actually we took a slight angle on it. So it was very much looking at the investment potential. So where are the growth areas? How can we understand if a industry or sector in our region is attractive to an investor, be that equity or actually primarily a business looking to either expand in our region or come to our region from outside, somewhere else in the UK, or even better from overseas. Not better, you know what I mean. So our exam question was how to identify and showcase emerging, growing and established clusters across the Midlands with the potential to attract investment. And ultimately this is around narrative, business cases, value proposition, that kind of thing. So next slide, please. I'm cantering through this, but obviously we'll have Q&A at the end. So because we are a partnership organisation, we began by looking at what the local authorities, LEPs at the time and so on were talking about as their priorities. So looking at all of the local industrial strategies, talking to these partners. We have a trade and investment forum and various other things. So we began by looking at, okay, these are the industries or sectors that local authorities, other kind of growth bodies across the Midlands are talking about as their priorities. And the next step was to review that based on the actual evidence base. So there's an outline here, but I'm going to pass over to Fatima to talk through how we did that. I should also flag at this point, we work with Data City, our kind of primary partner, but we also work with a few other companies as well to get a good insight into this. But Fatima, if you want to talk us through what we did.
Thank you, Josh. First of all, just so you know a little bit about myself, I'm Fatima Garcia, I'm a consultant at the Data City, and this basically means that I lead on the design and the delivery of research projects, such as the ones that we're gonna discuss on this call. And as Joshua has introduced, like right now for LEPs and LAs and like different regional strategies, it is key to understand the sectoral structure of the area. And it is very difficult to understand like the growth of new sectors such as advanced manufacturing or artificial intelligence using traditional frameworks for industrial classifications such as SIC codes. And this is where, like the Data City with the Arctic proposition, we try to make a change to that. So just for anybody that is like not familiar with it, we use Arctics or real-time industrial classifications as means to create new data sets for new emerging sectors. So this starts by creating a sector taxonomy with an expert where we define how, for example, the space of artificial intelligence looks like. And with all the resources developed with the expert, we use our machine learning technology that fundamentally helps us to group companies that do the same as they describe it on their website text, and create that way data sets that put together all companies that describe themselves as AI companies in a data set. So that is the type of information that we provided with Midlands Engine. We created all those sectoral classifications to then do an in-depth regional analysis and try to understand what was the geography of all these key emerging sectors in the area. And we use different parameters and different indicators to find opportunities in the region. So first of all, we use location quotients. Location quotients are just a figure that let us know whether a region over-specialize in a particular sector. So we can know, for instance, whether Birmingham is over-specialized in advanced manufacturing in comparison to the UK as a whole, finding that way an opportunity in that area. So that is one of the things that we need to understand the regional composition of these sectors. But as you can see on the slide, we also created some 3D maps. These maps fundamentally part the area in different hexagons that that cover the same area. Then we located the companies in these little hexagons, and we put together all, for example, business counts that we found in that specific area. And as you can see, you have the spikes that more or less represent the concentration of business counts or turnover, for example, in those specific bits. And that way is a very visually appealing and quite darkly informative way to know that there are areas in the Midlands that have a significant concentration of opportunities and resources in comparison to others. But all of this together, more data that we developed, was what built this set of different metrics, in this case 23 metrics that covered 4 different ecosystems that then informed the development of roundtables and other discussions that Joshua can let you know about that much better than me.
Well, thanks, Fatima. So on this point, I'll come on to lessons learned in a second and some kind of reflections on it. But one of the big things in this was we wanted to effectively provide an evidence base for our partners. So local authorities, investment promotion agencies, businesses themselves can use at a kind of a wider functional economic geography. So the Midlands Engine is an arbitrary geography as it is. So is a local authority, whatever, even bigger scale. However, it's a Goldilocks zone because within that region, you've got, for example, hour travel to work times. You can map things out in a slightly bigger scale that hopefully is useful. So on these maps, for example, we break the entire region down into 1 square kilometre hexagons, and it's about counts within that. But one of the key things, and at the bottom of that list of bullet points there is cluster snapshots, is we publish the kind of insights in kind of an infographic form for each of those sectors. And part of that is very much around context. So we're talking about investment potential here, and I'll come on to that in a second as our kind of angle. And one of the key things in that is, of course, putting what's present in our region into context. So location quotients is obviously one way of doing it at a local level, but we were looking at, so for example, one of the metrics is around high growth companies. I think it was 27% of high growth ceramics companies, so advanced ceramics and so on, are in Stoke. 27% of the UK population of high growth companies in that space, for example. So it's all those kind of insights which actually demonstrate, okay, there's something special here. The roundtables are really important as well, but I'll move on now actually, and we can come back to the ecosystems in a second. But next slide. So here's a snapshot of the clusters. So there were 30 in total. We kind of aggregated into 6 super clusters, basically industries or sectors. I think we talk about these as clusters because the mapping infers the spatial element, but actually this is the presentation of key industries across our region, if we're honest about it. But within that, it's the highlighting specific localities, so business parks, cluster organizations, some of the more qualitative side, which is really important for complementing the core quantitative insight as well. In fact, that's one of our key recommendations and findings. It's the presence of a cluster development organisation, as we call it. So everything from an industry body through to a specialised business park like Myra Technology Park, for example, where they exist. There's kind of a concentration and high productivity and whatnot of high growth companies, for example. But the next slide, I've got some headline lessons learned, and then there's one more slide after that with a bit more detail. Kind of key thing in here is we need the resources to understand rapid economic change. We need to understand how our economy is changing. One of the really important parts of this work that we got the most value from working with the Data City for was actually identifying those emerging technology areas, those new industries and sectors that, as Alex and Fatima said earlier, aren't picked up by SI codes. So that was really important. And we've mapped out a number of things like disruptive financial technologies or space technology, AI and whatever else. And actually on the back of this work, we did some subsequent mapping of the previous government, the 5 key technology areas as well, using the same methodology. I think one of the key things in this as well, although there's no solution that fits all, so, aggregate industries is very different to video game development. Having a standardized framework through which to understand those, so the 4 ecosystems, so business, innovation, talent, and investment. And within that, you have things from high growth company counts through to accelerator support, cluster organizations, market share of domestic and foreign investment, and so on. Understanding all of that helps you model and understand these different industries and sectors and clusters. Although the importance of those different metrics and insights varies across them. So geography through to you know, connectivity to an innovation base if it's an emerging technology sector. But the next slide, some kind of quick final lessons learned. So we did this work with Data City a couple of years ago now, actually, although we're carrying it on now with some industry deep dives. I think one of the key things, I've mentioned the Goldilocks zone, but one of the big values and kind of benefits of us as a kind of regional body with our own observatory working with Data City and the other partners on this was being able to validate the data. So Data City, you know, constantly improving and changing their not changing, but improving on their data set and so on. But at the time, it was really valuable to look at, for example, oh, there's a really high population of businesses in Birmingham. You may have noticed on that map earlier. Well, actually, that was because there were a couple of businesses that registered tons of other businesses during COVID. So it's that kind of local insight and being able to go through the data, having understanding of these industries at a local level was really valuable and helped us work with Data City to improve the data later on as well. The investment potential, so I've kind of teased this throughout. So effectively, you can infer it through the metrics, through growth, especially disproportionate growth or higher market share. Comparative advantages through things like cluster organizations or specialized business parks or particularly university capabilities, talent pool, graduate retention, that kind of thing. So that's the kind of how we're articulating investment potential and understanding it through the lens of clusters. And clusters in our work is a kind of a subjective exercise. The two ways we could have approached it, and I think the second way is what we'll understand in a second from some of our projects. So because we started by looking at from a lead of what local authorities were talking about as their clusters, we had a framework to build from. The other way to do it would have come up with our methodology and just see what comes out of it. But because we had that lead as that kind of subjective angle, as kind of a marketing angle, these are the industries we want or we think we have, and therefore how can we articulate them? That gave us quite a solid framework to build on. On that, and I think it was teased with Alex is going to talk about in a bit around the Data City platform, but one of the key things from this piece of work was actually establishing that foundation. So we have what we believe is a pretty robust framework and methodology for understanding and mapping clusters. So you can come back to that over time. We have our custom industrial classifications on Data City, so we can monitor growth or change over time as well across different metrics. Having that insight and that ability is really valuable, especially when we're working with local authority level partners or other entities, and being able to help them understand what's going on in their place from a regional level. The quantitative is the foundation of this work, of course, the data insight, but the qualitative was really valuable. I mentioned a second ago that kind of local knowledge, being able to validate the data, but actually also speaking to these industries through roundtables, and we've got a number of further roundtables planned to really understand, okay, yes, this is really important, or this factor is not so important, and therefore how that impacts how we talk about that industry or that cluster. And then the mapping as well. So we took those 1 square kilometer hexagons as a way to kind of go beyond boundaries, although obviously we visualized the boundaries on the map in terms of local authority boundaries or whatever else. But by mapping out in that way, it was a small enough scale where it's useful, but high enough where actually it's reliable. So it's kind of, again, Goldilocks zone of working out how to approach it. Loads more I could say, but I've taken a bit too much of your time already, so I'll stop there, but happy to take questions at the end.
Thank you very much, Josh. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions, just keep, there's been a few popping in the chat, so if you keep dropping them in there, we'll try and get through the content, and then we'll go back to these at the end around the panel Q&A, and I'll probably just blur the panel Q&A and Q&A into one thing. Okay, I think it's over to John now to talk about the Innovation Clusters map.
Thanks very much, Alex. Hi, everyone. I'm John Cooper from the Department of Science, Innovation, Technology. I'm the head of analysis for R&D system policy. So I analyse regions, the R&D workforce, and institutions like universities, and try to make better policy with better analysis. So all of this work was brilliant for us, and I'd say quite crucial in our understanding of the R&D system in the UK. So when I started in this role 6 years ago, we were really relying on the kind of 12 regions and nations when we broke down R&D and innovation capabilities. And then the next thing we did was get it to sub-regions, which is the 40 sub-regions of the UK, and we had a data tool for that. But it was still just washing out a lot of the interesting variability within these regions. And you couldn't really get precise and say what were the strengths, which regions were the strongest and what were the strengths within them. And it leads to policy making that is probably going to be focused on major cities, London, Manchester, Birmingham, Glasgow, etc., and missing quite a lot of the great innovation that's happening around the country. So that was kind of the motivation for this project, which we did with Cambridge Econometrics and Data City, and it was solving two problems. So Data City's already tackled the getting better industry classifications. So standard industry classifications were not good enough, so they had Artix, and then it was the spatial dimension. So I won't go into the method because that's coming next. But some of the uses of this for us already, the cluster mapping tool has highlighted areas. I think over 3,000 clusters in the country that are doing these sort of emerging technologies, and it's brought these into focus into the policy debate. So hopefully, public and private investors will be more likely to go there. We also have plans to get more understanding over time about the barriers and enablers of growing these clusters. So what we don't have yet is a kind of time trend, but we're hoping to build up and see which clusters grow faster, why, which use more public grants versus tax credits versus kind of skills, which need more skills or housing policies, etc. So I think there's still quite a lot we don't know, but we definitely have a lot more precise data now for more precise policy. So I think probably that's enough, and then if anyone's got any questions, happy to answer them later. And I'll hand over to Adam, I think.
Yeah. Do you want to move on to the next slide? Yeah. So hi everyone, I'm Adam Brown. I'm head of UK Economic and Social Policy at Cambridge Econometrics. We're a small UK-based SME who mostly do work around data analysis, economic modelling, policy evaluation, local economic development strategy. We specialise in themes like climate, environment, infrastructure and planning, labour markets and inequality, and most relevantly here, kind of innovation and productivity. So we led the design of the kind of the analysis that underpins the cluster map. The key kind of objectives really were to come up with a kind of a workable definition of clusters that kind of met the kind of the standards of academic rigor that were kind of required, and then figure out a way to collect and analyze the data in such a way as that would actually kind of produce a realistic set of clusters that actually kind of captures to the best of our ability what's actually happening out there on the ground. So we kind of came up with this definition of these kind of 4 characteristics that ideally you'd want a cluster to have. So we're talking here about innovation clusters, not just kind of sectoral clusters, industrial clusters. So we wanted them to be innovative. So we needed to find evidence, ideally, that there was innovation, R&D activity going on by the firms or organizations within these clusters. And we needed them to be spatially located. Obviously, there are lots of examples of kind of collaboration networks of firms and organizations working together in innovative ways right across the country. That's really important and that's really useful to understand, but it's not a cluster. Ideally, we wanted them then kind of either to be internally collaborative, so evidence that there was collaboration going on between the firms in the cluster, or for them to be involved in some kind of related activity so that they had experienced kind of what we call localization, agglomeration benefits, so that they're the kind of the benefits of being spatially proximate to other firms or organizations who are doing similar things or working in the same kind of value chain as your firm is. So those are the kind of the 4 categories. And so, as I say, ideally, we wanted the clusters to be able to find evidence in the data that the clusters were hitting all 4 of these. However, we were also kind of interested in clusters that kind of maybe just missed, so hit 3 of these criteria, but didn't hit one of the others. So we kind of came up with this typology of clusters that met 3 of the criteria. So they might be ones that were not spatially proximate, so they're not really clusters, but they are, again, interesting and important in their own right. So we call these kind of dispersed RDI collaboration communities, and there are lots of those across the UK. And we've got like a nice network map where you can kind of go and look and see who's collaborating with who. We would kind of we made a distinction between clusters that were sectorally specialized versus sectorally diverse. So that's quite interesting, because and we'll talk about this a little bit in a minute, we talk about the work that we did for West Yorkshire. You find that, kind of some of these emerging technology clusters quite often originate with firms from two different kind of sectoral backgrounds kind of coming together and kind of collaborating. So a fintech cluster might be a collaboration between firms in finance and firms in kind of software development. And so we'll kind of try to map out the differences there. And then obviously firms that collaborated in different ways other than the data we were able to actually measure directly. So in order to do that, we had to kind of collect data on all four of these criteria. So if you just flick to the next slide. So this is the data that we collect, and there's quite a lot, and it took quite a long time to kind of try to kind of link all this stuff together, because there's not always an easy way of kind of joining this data together. So we used, probably the biggest data set we used in some ways was the IDBR, which gives you kind of information about every firm and local unit above a certain size characteristic in the whole of the UK, and you have kind of time series data, and you have quite detailed data around kind of employment on specific sites in that. So we use that. The disadvantage of that is it only has SIC codes, so you're not able to identify kind of novel emerging technologies. So for that, we linked it together with the Arctic data that the Data City produce, which covers a really wide range of firms. But we were able then to, by combining these data sets, identify like where the activity was taking place. So join those two together. We then looked at some different ways of trying to measure. So that gave us a lot of the kind of spatial detail and the sectoral detail. We then needed to think about, well, hang on, what's happening in collaboration? What's happening in terms of how innovative are these firms? So we collected data from Innovate UK and UKRI to look at which firms were applying for grants to do research activity. So, and that doesn't just tell you which ones are applying for grants, it also tells you which ones are kind of co-applying with other firms. So from that, you can start to get a bit of a feel for who's collaborating with who, but both within your clusters and between your clusters. And we also use this MATE data set that looked at scientific publications. And again, that doesn't just give you an indication of which firms are being RDI active. It also, you have kind of co-citations between firms, so you can then start to think about who's collaborating with who. So by bringing together these 5 data sets, we were able to identify which firms were doing what, where they were, how they were spatially clustered, but also then start to think about what the kind of the collaboration networks were between these groups of firms, and like how much kind of collaboration we were seeing both between clusters and within clusters. Next slide. Right, so I'm going to hand over to Fatima, who's going to talk you through this amazing tool that the Data City produced off the back of all this analysis.
Thank you, Adam. So I will start sharing my screen now, and hopefully you can all see that. Yes, thank you. So yeah, this is the output of all the work that Adam has just like introduced. You can also find the report of all the work written by Cambridge Econometrics following the link here. But fundamentally, this is a tool that allows you to explore all the cluster data that we develop, and you can do it so by using the filters, these filters that I'm showing you at the minute. So as you can see, this will allow you to select a wide range of sectors, types of clusters, and lots of information to start learning more about an industry. So how does this work? Let's say, for example, that I have an interest in the advanced manufacturing and the advanced materials industries. So in this way, I can just go to the Arctic filter and tick the 2 sectors that I'm interested in, and then just take this away and start exploring a little bit those clusters. Straight away, I can learn things like, where do these clusters overlap? Are there areas that have like a regional advantage on both of them? And if I zoom in a little bit more, I can see all the details on where they're actually located. Actually, this tool is interactive. So if you click on a cluster, it will give you some information about that cluster itself. You know a little bit more about how many companies of the entire sector classification of this Arctic have been found in this cluster, the estimated number of employees, investment information, and also information on the growth stage of these companies. So you can also know how old the companies in these clusters are and whether it is like relatively new or older than other clusters. So this is something that you can do straight away, and you can add as many sectors as you would like. And this way, we have concentrated on Arctics, but as Adam has discussed, we also created some other sectors that follow, that kind of like target more foundational industries and that follow an SIC code-based classification. This was led by Cambridge Econometrics, and actually combining these two data sets, both Arctics and these SIC code-based classifications, can give you as well a lot of information. Because what I could do is actually compare the advanced materials industry that we know that is like a specific or that uses a specific advanced technologies to do their activity with the traditional chemicals and material industry, and see whether the foundational industry and the newer branch of the chemicals and materials industry are located. And we can see how there are quite a lot of overlaps. However, we can also find some other like interesting bits, like an isolated cluster for advanced materials here that is not associated with another one. So it just lets us know a little bit more of like, yeah, like the composition of different areas, not only about the clusters themselves, but about the geography of areas as a whole. So this is all about if we want to concentrate on sectors, but actually you could also look into the innovative clusters, or those clusters that we found by this collaboration data that Adam was introducing. So if I click here, what you will see is a set of clusters where we found that companies tend to collaborate more than in other areas. And you see that here, for example, things that we would definitely expect, like collaboration, like innovation collaboration in Cambridge or in Oxford. But here we also find other interesting bits, like Norwich is being like highlighted, some areas in Lincoln. So this is again another way of like highlighting like opportunities for some regions, and yeah, just communicate it to the wider public. And lastly, you can also overlay a set of like important or relevant institutions over the clusters. For instance, you can see where research-intensive universities are located. And for this specific map that we're showing at the minute, this makes a lot of sense. We're looking about like networks of innovation and research, and we're seeing that like universities that are like intensive in research, they're located in the same area. You can also look into the catapults. So how do they, where are they placed, and whether there is a correlation between all these different institutions. And also we can have a look into Publics and R&D labs. And altogether, this is a tool that can very quickly help you understand the characteristics of a set of sectors or an area. The last thing that I will say, just because I want to make sure that we have time for the rest of the presentation and the Q&A, is that you can download the underlying data for the clusters from this site. So you only have to click this button and it looks like this. You will find just the cluster name and a set of like, data points and interesting bits for you to do your own research with the outputs of ours. And yeah, if you have any more questions, please feel free to add it to the chat and we can go through them later. Thank you.
Do you want to move to the next slide? There we go. Okay, so As this was the Leeds Digital Festival, I thought we'd just add in a little bit of local content and talk very briefly about some work we've been doing for West Yorkshire Combined Authority off the back of this DSIT Innovation Cluster Research. And actually, one of the things you can do with that data, with that analysis, is look into specific Arctic-based clusters and try to understand what are the firms that are in that cluster and what kind of sectors have they come from. So I gave the example before of a fintech cluster might be drawn from firms from finance and software, and they've kind of combined together to kind of work together to create this kind of new emerging fintech analysis. And that's actually true of any kind of Arctic cluster, right? Some of them come specifically from one kind of traditional sector, but most of them are kind of mergers and draw firms from a range of different sectors. And that actually varies across the country. You're going to have some net zero clusters that are based around firms in kind of waste and recycling. You're going to get others that are based more around firms that are doing kind of EV manufacturing or agriculture and land use and this kind of thing. So across the country, there's different patterns of different firms from different sectors coming together to produce these kind of emerging tech clusters. And so what we did was we looked at how this actually kind of works in West Yorkshire. So we looked specifically at the different Arctic clusters in West Yorkshire, and we looked at the SIC codes of the firms that are in them. And then we produced this little schematic diagram here. So on this diagram, essentially, what we've got is we've got the blue squares of the traditional SIC code clusters or sectors within West Yorkshire, and then the edges, the lines, are the Arctic-based emerging tech clusters that those sectors are collaborating on. So you can kind of start to see, okay, so e-commerce, the e-commerce cluster in West Yorkshire is kind of a collaboration of IT sector and then the logistics sector. It kind of makes sense if you think about it. And so you can kind of look around all of these. Food tech is machinery, and food, drink, and hospitality. So you can kind of start to understand how these clusters have come about and how it is that the different traditional sectors and the way in which West Yorkshire has strengths in particular traditional sectors, why it has the kind of emerging tech clusters it has. And so this is what we found for West Yorkshire, and for other places it would look very different. So we thought this was really interesting. West Yorkshire Combined Authority found it was very interesting as well. And then we tried to think of some ways in which they could then design their policy so as to kind of support these clusters, to identify new clusters that they could potentially help develop by encouraging traditional sectors to start collaborating together. And we kind of identified three main opportunity areas. So one around digital emerging technology. So this is kind of the incredibly innovative IT sector, of which TDC is an example, based in West Yorkshire, collaborating and working with all of the kind of traditional professional service sectors like legal and accounting, media, health, that are in West Yorkshire, and helping them become more innovative by helping them move into this kind of emerging tech clusters. There was another one around that we identified around advanced manufacturing that tends to be more broadly spread around West Yorkshire. Now we're calling this advancing manufacturing rather than just advanced manufacturing, because it includes manufacturing sectors and clusters that aren't traditionally classified as advanced manufacturing, but are actually have the potential to become advanced. A lot of the new innovations in kind of robotics and automation will be in things like food processing and textile. So that's kind of the next great leap forward in terms of productivity of a number of these sectors. And what we're seeing is West Yorkshire's well placed to kind of take advantage of a lot of those. And then the third one is really about net zero, which is obviously on the tip of everyone's tongue. Everyone's waiting for the green industrial strategy to land. And it's about thinking about how West Yorkshire can position itself at the forefront of this. And, actually it has a really strong water and waste offer. So how can it make sure that it takes advantage of that? So just a little flavor of how you can take this data and how you can kind of think about it in terms of helping to develop policy and strategy for specific places.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So there's loads of questions coming in, so I'm going to be very quick and just show you where we're headed. It actually might answer some of them, so there's some questions about what's happening moving forward. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. We have been commissioned by Warwick and Queen's universities via the Department of Economy Northern Ireland to do a similar piece of work based on Arctics for Ireland, so Northern Ireland and Ireland, to show their view of clusters, but not artificially separated by the fact that it's the United Kingdom versus Ireland. So what we've done is we've taken the opportunity to roll the learnings of these projects up into another iteration of the tool. So what you can do here is you can take things like, let's take examples of the 5 technology focuses of DSIT. So we can look at artificial intelligence, engineering biology, and maybe quantum. And these are all sectors that we are defining, we have or are actually in the middle of updating in case of artificial intelligence with the relevant DSIT teams to produce the actual lists of companies that we think represent those sectors in the UK. And those are published as Arctics in our platform to all users and then reflected on these maps. So what I've done is I've selected a few Arctics. We've actually introduced a range of tools so that obviously on the DSIT tool, we've shown you, we did the work of determining what we think those clusters should be presented as according to the specific objectives of the project. But there are lots of ways to look at clusters, both technically from a clustering algorithm point of view, but also choices to be made around what you mean by geospatially co-located and how dispersed you want to allow that analysis to be. And quite often the answer to that varies by sector, and there's lots of nuance if you want to get into it. So what we've done is we've built a tool which allows us to produce work with our partners for people like DSIT without having to do it all at code level. It's a user interface that analysts can use, but also to make it available to our customers so that you can take this and do your own clusters analysis yourselves, define clusters the way that makes the most sense for your particular context. So you've got a range of clustering algorithm options. You've got a range of options specific to those, depending which one you've selected, which allow you to change the variables to meet your use case. And then we're starting with just plotting the actual companies. The difference here being you can see the firm level data. If you have a license to our platform, we can't distribute firm level data otherwise because we'd be in breach with our data providers. But what you can then do is turn that firm level data into clusters views and get the count data here. And then there's all sorts of stuff we can start to do to this. Then we can start layering on the investment data, the jobs and skills data. We could look at pulling back to the Innovate UK and other data points if we wanted as well to sort of allow you to build clusters, and then it would pull in the evidence of collaboration, the evidence of fundraising, and so on into whatever view you're looking at. And then you can use that in your analysis or what have you. So that's a very early view of this. This is currently as a standalone website which we delivered for this project, but it will be published as an actual product in our product for all our platform users. Okay, so that's probably enough from me. I'm going to stop sharing and we will go to the Q&A. Andy, do you want to put just like a Q&A slide up? So at the moment, as much as I love Adam's face, I'm looking at Adam. There we go. Yeah, cool. Okay. So there's a lot of stuff that's come in here. So I'm wondering how many of the standard questions to go through and how many of these to get. If I can try and group some of these into, there's specific questions about interaction with local and national government and how clusters are useful in that context. Does anybody want to have a stab at that? Maybe Josh, you might be, sorry to put you on the spot, but you might be.
Yeah, no, it's all good. I think the key thing there is with local growth plans and industrial strategy, and these being a kind of core unit of that. So in our context, obviously, we started with the former local industrial strategies and the like, but just evidencing actually where there is, for example, a high location quotient of a particular industry, high growth companies, that kind of thing. Just understand actually what are your opportunity areas, what's your stock, and then the assets that can complement growth. So, for example, specialized business parks, particularly university or other kind of private R&D centers that could lead to spin outs. So, what's your stock and what's your future? I guess it's kind of an answer to that question.
Yeah, so if I were to sort of play that back, it's about it's about a clear evidence base
Yeah.
and you being able to use that to explain why your local industrial strategy is as you present it, and then also you've got an evidence base which you can then use to track impact of interventions over time. I think it's what we're hoping for. I think for all of this, it sort of plays back to that, doesn't it? You've got that. I love the phrase you came up with earlier, the sort of unit of understanding. As a reason for a cluster definition, because you're right. What it's allowing you to do is pull in lots of actually quite disparate and complex concepts into something which is quite easy to get your head around and hold on to, which you can then also measure and you can also track. Which there are quite a few questions in the Q&A about, is this going to be updated? So the answer to that is yes, we are just working through what phase 2 looks like, and the tool I've just shown you will form part of that, but it's not just restricted to that. There is data aspects to it and other bits as part of that brief. Always useful to hear what people think we should do to it. There were some questions about data quality in here, which I thought were quite interesting. So there was one specific one about Arctics. So yeah, we do a lot of work on QA of Arctics, but no data is perfect. We are in our tool. You can self-report anything you think is missing or misclassified, or sometimes the wrong website gets assigned to a company, so we need to correct that. But we're always aiming for above 90% accuracy. We'd love 100%, but we can only do that with manual checking of millions of companies is cost prohibitive. So the more our user community help us with that, the better. And we do stuff algorithmically with that data. So that data comes in and is used to train machine learning algorithms on QA. So it is really important to get really good, robust data sets for those training sets for our machine learning processes. When it comes to working with the 5 priorities and the DCIT teams, we are defining those lists with DCIT and sector experts, and there is an extra layer of sort of manual scrutiny applied to those before that data is published. So, but we want the data to be as accurate as possible, and we want people to tell us if there's anything that looks a bit odd, and we will fix it. Equally, sometimes company websites are not easy to scrape. So we don't scrape them because the crawler might be poorly designed or prohibited. So sometimes we need to do some manual stuff, like you just have to get involved, and sometimes it's very large companies that are particularly difficult. So again, we do need that community feedback into it. I guess going through the Q&A here, we've only got 8 minutes, so I might dig into some of these. With so much interaction now happening across the UK and internationally, how did the analysis consider clusters between firms who are not necessarily located in close physical proximity? Anybody want to have a stab at that one? I think I know the answer, but I don't want to just answer all these questions myself.
Yeah, I mean, I can answer that. So I think, as we mentioned before, we don't consider it to be a cluster unless they are spatially proximate. However, that doesn't mean they're not still interesting. We called them collaboration communities. They're not on the map because it's not really possible to present them on the map because they'll all overlap with each other. But if you look in the report, we do discuss them, and there is a kind of a data set underlying that talks about all the different collaboration communities. I think there's something like 127 that meet a certain criteria across the UK. And yeah, they are really, really important. We found that actually, I think something like 80% of collaborations were more than 50 kilometers. We only looked at UK data, so if you included international collaborations, they'd be even broader than that. So yeah, and there's a really nice network depiction you can look at to see both what clusters are collaborating with what, and like color-coded by what Arctic or SIC code they're in, so you can kind of get a feeling of how the whole UK collaboration network looks.
Yeah, so it's more of a network view, isn't it? Actually, there's a couple of questions on data here. So how do you connect make data, and the same for Innovate UK data to companies in collaboration. And I think the answer to that is relatively straightforward. We are looking for the company's name in the site, you know, in the publication, and joining at that company name matching level. Is there any plan to make the data available in a format where it can be used in GIS to undertake your own analysis, i.e. downloadable shapefiles? We have discussed this, Fatima. I think this is possibly a phase 2 requirement. I think we might have looked at it.
Yeah, and we understand that having access to the shapefiles will make a massive difference for this piece of work to then be useful for other researchers, because in the end, like the summary data that you have for each cluster can be compared for any different sector. You can try and make predictions. You can try and find even like some kind of like relationship amongst clusters, considering how they overlap. So yeah, we're really thinking about ways where we can make this data available to everybody.
Well, here's an interesting one. So was there a thought of ranking the clusters based on different parameters, like how dense the cluster is or how closely firms are collaborating in that sector?
I would say just very quickly that with the underlying data that you can download at the moment, you could actually rank those. But yeah, I don't think following some of the criteria, maybe not all of the criteria that you've mentioned in that message. But yeah, I don't think that we'd had that like ranking discussion at all.
Josh, you want to?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's kind of a redundant exercise at a kind of a meta level, unless you're looking at, for example, things around sector adjacency. And if there's a core cluster or sector where actually there's lots of transferable talent, or, you know, it links in and supports lots of others, I think that would be the only logical way to rank them, because otherwise it's, you know, logging versus, I don't know, dishwashers. What's the point?
John, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I mean, we did get a bit of pressure to rank them internally in government, and I kind of pushed back because I think it is, you know, you're missing the context there. Really, you could rank them on number of firms, density, you know, lots of different metrics, and I think for any particular sector, I think it is useful to know that the map tells you which are the biggest sectors in a certain, sorry, the biggest clusters in a certain sector. That's really useful, but you're always going to end up with subjective judgments when you're ranking clusters. So I have pushed back on it. I would say though that the map gives us huge reassurance when the public is investing in something. It's about the absorptive capacity of the area and the capabilities of the area. Because when we try to get a business case through, you know, for example, through the Treasury or an internal process, the question is, you know, how can we be sure that the money will be well spent? And if we know, the more we know about these firms are in the cluster, you know, if we're directing the money there, so it does really inform decisions, but it needs to go alongside lots of other information. We wouldn't make spending decisions just based on this, and that's why I don't want to rank.
Right, there's still, we've got 3 minutes. There's a very quick one. What's a Catapult? Catapult isn't a quasi-governmental organisation which looks after specific sectors. So if you Google things like the Digital Catapult, you'll find examples of these organisations. They help. They work. They're funded by DCIT through UKRI, I think I'm right. And then they work as sort of convening, collaborating sort of bodies with the sector. So we work with most of them, as I'm sure most of the people on the panel do too. There's a very specific technical data one about IDBR data on firms at a SIC level with regional data from the data city. Did you have to make assumptions? Adam, do you remember?
I mean, I think it was based on company registration numbers. So we had a list of firms from the Arctics and we had a list of firms from the IDBR, and we had to match them mostly by company registration numbers. The ones that didn't have a company registration number, we had to spend a long time doing name matching, which, as you know, is really difficult because firms are really bad at registering themselves under the same name every time. So there's a bit of a kind of a fuzzy logic process going on there. But yeah, I think we managed to get something like an 85% match rate. So it wasn't perfect, but it was a lot better than our initial initial attempts.
There's a question about, are we going to include space, aviation, and aerospace? So the answer to that is yes, we're actively working with DCIT on the definition of the space sector for that purpose. I think aviation's actually pretty well covered by SIT codes. It's such a sort of, but space obviously bleeds into it. What else? Some thank yous. Where is the data on collaboration communities? If you look on the map, you can select those views. So there are toggles for them if you pull out the tool on the left-hand side and have a look at those, I think you might be saying. And can the data be visualized on a parent company level? It can, but not in the tool. So you'd have to speak to us about that. So you can do it in our platform because there's, as you probably, given that you've asked the question, there is complexity in groups and the definition of parent, depending how big the group is, and isolating different parts of it from a sectoral point of view. What else we've got? Anything else anyone else has noticed that you think we should talk about? I'm aware that we just hit the 11 o'clock line. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody who's joined. If you would like to speak to any of us after this with specific questions about your own world, please do get in touch. We will send out a copy of the video, the slides, and ways of contacting us in a follow-up email to the session. If you are interested in the clusters tool that I presented and access to that, again, please do get in touch. It's new. What we want is people to use it. You will have the opportunity to directly feed into the product roadmap for this. We would like to extend this work to all our platform users. And obviously, if you're not already a platform user, please do change that and get in touch with us. And we can sell you access. Equally, if you've got any clusters work, and some of you may be preparing for local industrial strategy pieces and thinking about evidence base, all of us are gearing up for that. So hit us with any questions you might have, or ideally start talking to us about how we might be able to help you prepare that. There was some funding available pre-election. I'm trying to get clarification whether it's persisting, but there was something like a £250,000 pot announced per strategy. So there is some support available. There was some support available. Try and get some clarity on that. And those who are working in local government, if you want to reach out to local government association, there's an early stage there about trying to help with evidence-based prep, which I think they'd welcome. Perhaps get in touch with myself initially, and I can connect to the right people rather than me accidentally causing them to be inundated. I think that's it. Thank you very much, everybody. And we'll wrap it up there. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks all for coming.